Welcome everyone to the virtual Peoria Riverfront Museum. My name is Zach Zetterberg. I'm the curator of art here at the museum, and I'm here to host the third session of three live guitar session talks we're having with a very special guest and friend to the museum, HP Newquist. HP is the brains behind a great exhibit that we are bringing to Peoria September 26th, I believe will actually be the opening date, scheduled opening date. And we're really looking forward to that. We've had a number of talks in the past 2 weeks with HP. We got to know him a little bit and about the collection, the exhibition, and we learned last week about the history and the acoustic guitar. And I'd just like to say the exhibition is it really fits the museum's mission very well, in that the exhibition looks at the not only the art of the guitar, but also the science of the guitar, the history of the guitar, and also all the players that have achieved great things with the music they've played on their guitars. So it meets everything in our mission, and we're really glad to be bringing it here. And I have to say, give a big shout out to our friends at Illinois Mutual and PNC for supporting the exhibition. And I have to say thank you so much to our guest tonight for the third time, and HP Newquist, the executive director of the National Guitar Museum. How are you doing, HP?
Doing great, Zach. Thanks very much for having me on. Hopefully third time's a charm.
Yeah, it's been really great hearing about the history of the guitar, and I think it just you talking about it, I think it just proves that this exhibition is going to be a really great experience.
Well, I certainly hope so, and I've enjoyed each of our sessions, and I think that the way you guys have structured this is nice, in that we're getting a chance to talk about the guitar and, as you said, its history, a little bit of the science, without getting too deep in the woods about the nitty-gritty. I mean, you can find out as much as you'd ever want to find out about the guitar in the exhibit when it comes to Peoria, but these have been nice, really informal ways to tell people about how the guitar came to be.
It's been great. So last week we talked about the acoustic guitar. This week we're going to enter the realm of the electric guitar, and I know it's a pretty heavy subject, and we've got some things to cover tonight. So I think we should just jump right into it. Here, HP.
Let me put on my glasses so I can see what I'm doing again.
Okay.
What I will do is share the screen here. Whoops. Don't share that screen. I will share the screen. And we will go here. Here. And now, can you see?
Yeah. Looks great.
You say electric on the screen?
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that's really interesting about the guitar is that prior to 1930, there was no acoustic versus electric guitar. You didn't have to distinguish between the two, because prior to 1930, technically 1932, there was no electric guitar. So all guitars were guitars, and they all produced sound acoustically. And acoustic guitars produce sound by vibrating their soundboards, as we talked about last week, and producing sound waves. That, as we'll see, was not really enough for musicians at the time. So we'll do a real quick recap of what happened before. We'll start this out with most people are like, oh, it's the electric guitar. We're going to talk about Les Paul. He invented the electric guitar. He didn't. That's a misconception. And we're going to, even though Les Paul was an amazing inventor, Les Paul and the electric guitar are not necessarily one and the same. So what we have to do is we have to go back to a gentleman named George Beecham. And we talked a little bit about him last week. He was the head of a Hawaiian steel band. And from 1915 forward, after the Pan Pacific conference in San Francisco, Hawaiian music was the most popular form of music in America right up until World War II. Astoundingly, not country, not jazz, not blues, Hawaiian music, by far the most popular form of music. And one of the main instruments in Hawaiian music was slide guitar, lap steel guitar. You lay it on your lap, you got a guitar like this. Instead of holding it like this, you hold it like this, and you play it by running a slide here, and you play it in your lap. Well, those guitars were typically made out of metal and didn't make a lot of noise. But as the popularity of Hawaiian music grew throughout America, they played bigger and bigger venues. So it went from being small rooms to little auditoriums to bigger auditoriums to theaters. And the guitarists couldn't hear themselves on those little guitars. So Beecham, along with two brothers from Czechoslovakia named the Dopieras, came up with a way to try and make the guitar louder. And what they did is they turned that lap steel I showed you into an all-metal guitar with a built-in speaker cone. Now, it wasn't electrified. It's just a speaker cone like you think of in a big old stereo speaker that vibrated and helped push sound outward. Now, remember, this is the late 1920s, so again, we don't have stereos. We don't have much electricity. But pushing that air forward made guitars louder. And so you had an instrument called a resonator, which we also call a dobro. It helped guitarists hear themselves a little bit better in these bands. And it worked really well for a long period of time. But as the bands got bigger and bigger, you had more participants in the band. You had more singers, you had keyboard players, you had percussionists. And all of a sudden that little metal guitar with the speaker wasn't loud enough. So the idea of how to make a guitar louder has always been the defining element of why guitar has changed. Not the beauty, not necessarily the sound, how to make it louder. Because throughout its history, the guitar has been played in small groups, from parlors to the courts of kings to very large, today, arenas. How do you make that instrument louder? So the idea of making it louder started with Beecham. And then most people think that it, after the that steel dobro, that was kind of the jumping off point. But it was Beecham himself who decided he needed to be louder, and that even his invention with the metal cone with the Dopiera brothers wasn't loud enough. So what he did was he took those lap steel guitar and basically put a magnet over the top of the strings of the guitar. And what happens when you put a magnet over metal strings is it vibrates. And those strings, each of those strings causes an interruption in the magnetic field around a magnet. And if you attach wire to that magnet, it'll send signals to another source so that the vibrations are picked up and amplified. So by putting a magnet over the top of his strings, and you can see it in this this diagram here, it's kind of long bar across. He basically plugged that into a radio. Again, we don't have stereos, we don't have amplifiers. Plugged into a large radio. And the vibrations from the strings were now able to be played through a radio. And he could turn the radio up. It was heavy. You carried those big 100-pound radios that your great-grandparents had.
Yeah.
And he could take it from gig to gig. And he patented it in 1931. The first one was produced, first real one was produced in 1932. Production began in full in 1934. And we actually have number 11 from the production line of 1934 in the exhibit. So you'll see the frying pan. As a matter of fact, you'll see this frying pan here on your right. And it's called a frying pan, obviously, because it looks like a frying pan. It's made of metal. Those two kind of white bars down at the bottom of it are the magnets that pick up the vibrations. Today, we call that a pickup, but they're underneath the strings. All guitars, all electric guitars have them now, but they're under the strings and they're kind of hidden from view. So Beecham was the guy who created the first mass-produced electric guitar. And he did it because he was a Hawaiian guitar player and he did play Hawaiian music. So not rock, not blues, not jazz, not country. Hawaiian music gave rise to the first electric guitar.
That's great to know.
And most people don't know. And Gage
Yeah.
Brewer, who had his own steel band, allegedly performed the very first concert with an electric guitar on Halloween in 1932 in Wichita, Kansas. And here's a picture of him holding not only the prototype of the frying pan up in his arms, but also one of the resonator guitars that was made of metal that was not loud enough anymore. But when you plugged in the guitar he had up top, that kind of little radio console he has on the chair, all of a sudden the guitar was loud enough and they didn't have to worry about it competing with other instruments for volume. So from the minute electricity was introduced to guitars, the guitar went from being the quietest instrument in the room to being the loudest instrument on the planet. Never again were guitar players going to say, am I loud enough?
Yeah.
They're always loud enough. They're sometimes too loud. So you see the frying pan, and that's only a small step to the guitar we know today and what it looks like. And here's where everybody says, oh, well, that means we're going to go to the definitive electric guitar guy, which is Les Paul. Well, no, Les doesn't come into the story just yet. He's not. There's still some other people in there. Les was a jazz player, and he wanted to create an electric guitar just as Beecham did. And the most popular forms of guitar at the time were acoustic guitars played by people like Hank Williams, and they were big guitars and they were loud. But certainly those guitars weren't loud enough, and we talked last week about why they weren't loud enough. But even though those were the most popular forms of guitars, that frying pan started to make a little bit of a difference, at least in Hawaiian music, due to the Rural Electrification Act in 1936. All of a sudden, America was being federally mandated to have electricity all across the country. So it wasn't just in certain homes in big cities. Now it's let's get everybody electrified.
Yeah.
Now these guys can go to clubs or little bars or whatever, and they can actually plug in their radios with their little Hawaiian guitars, and they can be heard. So now the acoustic guitar loses a tiny bit of its standing in terms of, well, that's the only instrument we can play with guitar. Now we can plug in all across the country.
Quick question, HB. Does the frying pan guitar that is included in this exhibition, does it plug in and play, or are these things functioning?
They're all, everything in the exhibit functions. Now they're all in special cases.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're taking them out and playing them, but on occasion we do take them out and play them, and they work. I mean, it's, here we are 90 years later almost.
Yeah.
It still works, and you can still play it if you're a good slide player.
Cool.
So you had that acoustic, again, which we talked about last week, still being popular, and the idea of Beecham's pickup being taken and now putting those into actual acoustic guitars. So you see here an acoustic guitar that's been modified, and a magnetic pickup has been put in it to amplify the sound. And Gibson guitars started doing that, cutting holes in their acoustics, putting in a pickup in there, and kind of promoting them as jazz guitars. And Charlie Christian, one of the greatest guitarists of all time,
absolutely
played this guitar, and he'd play, theaters and dining halls, dinner theaters, clubs, that were cabarets, those kind of things, where he'd play for hours at a time, and he could hear himself all night long because he had these acoustic guitars with the pickup put in. Now, a problem with that is that the louder you get, an acoustic guitar, as we talked about last week, reverberates, the top reverberates. And much like you'll hear at any school assembly, if you get the microphone pickup too close to a closed surface, you get screeching loud vibrations. And acoustic guitars with those pickups were very prone to do that. And it was a concern for a lot of guitarists going forward. So it wasn't a problem with Hawaiian players because they had those solid metal lap steels. But jazz musicians really liked them. They really wanted to be able to be heard better without this problem of things feeding back like a bad high school assembly. At this point, you'd think Les Paul, being a great jazz player, would jump in. Not yet. The man who jumps in is a person named Paul Bigsby. Now, today we know Bigsby. Actually, luckily I have it here. Bigsby is best known for creating something called the vibrato bar, which is a part of the guitar. When you play it, I don't think you can hear this. You press the vibrato bar and you get that kind of surf sound. It bends the strings up and down. But he really, before that, he was a motorcycle mechanic. He liked tinkering with things. And he became friends with Merle Travis, who was a very great country player, invented his own form of playing, which is called Travis picking. And Merle Travis had seen all of these Hawaiian players getting loud sounds out of their metal Hawaiian lap steel frying pans, and had seen jazz players getting somewhat loud sounds, but having problems with feedback. So he was a motorcycle enthusiast, took his motorcycle to Paul Bigsby to get it fixed, and said, hey, I'd like to get a guitar that kind of does what happens with this Hawaiian lap steel, but still has more of a guitar-looking feel, kind of like the jazz guys have. So he asked Merle Travis to come up with a guitar. And in 1946, so 12 years after the Hawaiian guitars were mass-produced, Paul Bigsby came up with this particular guitar. And initially it was a one-off. He created a solid body, solid wooden body, so the wooden feedback, kind of like the solid metal body of a Hawaiian guitar.
Yeah.
But it had the shape of a standard guitar that country players or jazz players would have, and you'd play it outward. It wasn't played on your lap. So he crafted this initially as a one-off for Paul Bigsby, or for Merle Travis. Merle loved it. He had several made, became very popular with Merle's fans. And Merle, as a country artist during the 40s, would play it on radio and in all his concerts. And people became enamored, other musicians became enamored of it. So essentially, we consider this guitar that Bigsby made to be the first modern solid body electric guitar. And almost every guitar you've ever seen is a solid body made out of a piece of wood with a neck and pickups put into it. It's typically made of mahogany. It can be made of maple. It can be made of ash. It can be made of a lot of things. But we think
that's an interesting question. Just as a side note, the type of wood that a solid body guitar is made of does make a difference.
You're going to ask 100 people and you get 100 different answers.
Yeah.
A lot of people think so.
Yeah.
Just like an acoustic guitar, the wood ages and produces its own kind of vibrations, which affect the tone. A lot of people believe that an electric guitar, depending on the kind of wood, like swamp ash or maple or mahogany or cherry or walnut, will make the strings vibrate in such a way that it'll affect the tone as it's picked up by the pickups. Now, you have millions upon millions of people who will swear they can hear the difference. You'll have an equal number of people who say there's no difference, just make sure it feels good in my hands and I can go with it.
Yeah. I believe I'm in that camp.
Yeah. There's people who say it's 90% your fingers, 5% your amplifier, and 5% the wood of the guitar. But making it out of solid wood as opposed to metal meant that now it wasn't quite so heavy, although it was still 10 pounds roughly. And it could be made more cheaply. The problem was that Paul Bigsby was a tinkerer. He made a couple of these guitars, well, he made a handful of these guitars, and said, I'm really not interested in getting into this business. I don't want to be the electric guitar guy. I want to be the tinkerer, mechanical, metal guy. So he left that to, nope, still not Les Paul. We got to keep leaving Les Paul in the dust here. Leo Fender. And here's where our story pretty much, I don't want to say tops out, but it reaches its zenith. Leo Fender was a radio and TV repairman in Southern California. And he was repairing radios left and right. People from all over Southern California were coming to him to repair these. After a while, he got a reputation as being such a good repairman that the Hawaiian players who had their frying pans started bringing their frying pans to Leo, saying, hey, can you fix this? You know, the pickup's gone out or the wiring's loose or it's rusting out. Can you fix this? And he did. He discovered how these were made, understood them perfectly. And realized that when he had these in his shop, because he was in Southern California, which is home to West Coast country, certainly folk, and the burgeoning surf scene in the late 40s. It's like, well, you know, most of these guys don't play guitar on their lap. They play it face out, but there's no real guitar that's mass produced that they can buy to play facing out, like we all know today. And so Leo, being an inveterate tinkerer and technician, decided he would take the concept and create a guitar out of wood that you could play face out. And he introduced it in 1949. And it was initially called the Broadcaster and then the Esquire. And eventually they settled on a name called the Telecaster. Now it was called the Telecaster because in 1949, we had the first inklings of satellites in the space race. So we had television and Telstar and telecommunications. So he named it the Telecaster. And you'll see by looking at it here, it's relative to a lot of guitars, it's rather bland. It's a flat slab of wood. It's got pickups which were under the strings, a good innovation above and beyond what George Beecham had done. But all in all, it's a lot of wood with a black pickup and not much else. It's very, very simple design.
Yeah.
And Leo intended it that way because as a technician, he wanted to make it very easy to repair. Every piece screwed in and screwed out. You didn't have to unglue anything. Everything was, to this day, all Telecasters can be taken apart with a screwdriver. That wasn't beforehand when you had Gibsons and Guilds and Epiphones, all of which had glued on necks or glued on pieces. These could all be separated with a screwdriver. Now, the interesting thing in art history is that Leo claims really not to have been too familiar with Merle Travis's guitar as produced by Paul Bigsby, even though they all ran in the same circles. But you do see there's an incredible similarity here.
Absolutely.
And it was only a few years after Paul Bigsby came up with his, but the design, you know, you have the hook on the right-hand side, and for people who aren't guitarists, the reason that hook is there is so you can put your hand even further up the neck of the guitar and reach higher and higher notes on the fretboard. But outside of the ornamentation, these are very, very similar. And you have a running debate today as to whether Leo purposely took advantage of the fact that Paul didn't want to get into the business full time, or whether he came up with it on his own, or whether he saw, or the other one is that he saw Merle's guitar and said, oh, I can make one that's even cheaper and better. So, you know, all this is lost to history, but the fact remains that Leo Fender became the first person to mass produce the electric guitar as we know it today, a solid body guitar that faces forward. It can be played with any kind of music.
And that body style and that neck and that headstock, that's his first design, and it's stuck around this long.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's interesting.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Those designs actually go back to Germany in the late 1700s. I'm at a loss right now for the town, but there was a town in Germany that produced a bunch of luthiers who originally were cabinet makers, but they became luthiers, long story. But they all came up with this kind of scrolled headstock, which has a six on a side tuners, whereas all the acoustic guitars we saw last week, every single one pretty much had three on each side for balancing. This was a very unique German design from literally 100 to 200 years prior, but both of them ended up using it. And as we'll see with one of Leo's later designs, the headstock of the Stratocaster, which we'll see in a minute, is exactly the same as Paul Bigsby. Again, but the thing we have to give Leo credit for, since we're talking about it, you know, is it took an incredible amount of genius to see the market, and that he could create this guitar at a time when youth culture was getting popular in America, post World War II. What makes it even more astounding is he put this guitar together In his entire life, Leo Fender never learned how to play the guitar. Never, never did. His name is on more guitars than any other person in the history of the world. There are more Fender guitars out there than almost all others combined. Leo never learned how to play it. He never even learned how to tune. So here's a guy who had some incredibly great notions about how to promote the guitar, who really wasn't interested in playing.
I think for anybody watching, that is that's a wonderful thing to hear, because I think for anybody who has any interest in music, you don't have to be a musician to somehow get involved with music.
No.
There's so many ways, and so many people I know that do work on guitars or work on amps or work on they don't play any music, but they are doing something related to music every day.
Right. They love being around the fact that this is an instrument that produces beautiful music.
Yeah.
And whether you're the person who's decorating it or painting it or repairing it, you still have an association because you can be part of it.
It's awesome.
So Leo Fender, pretty amazing guy. So we finally get to introduce Les Paul. Les Paul, for decades, and by decades I mean up until the late 90s, when we had the internet finally came up, was oftentimes credited with creating the electric guitar. And before the internet, we couldn't look at a lot of these old newspapers and share the kind of information I'm sharing with you now. And because there was a guitar called the Les Paul, a lot of people thought, well, Les Paul, the Les Paul guitar, he created it. Les was a tremendously great jazz guitar player in the 50s, well, up until his death in the 90s, actually into the 2000s. He also created some of the greatest recording techniques we know. He created sound on sound, which allows one person to record one part, another person record another part at a different time. Multi-track recording. Prior to that, if you were going to record an orchestra or a band, you recorded them all at once on one track of tape. If somebody screwed up, you went back and you recorded it again. With Les's method, you could record the horns, you could record the percussion, then you could record the brass or the winds. You could record guitars. If anybody messed up their part, you could go back and record theirs without having to do everybody else's again. So his genius was in that kind of technical wizardry. Now, that's not to say he had nothing to do with the guitar. In 1941-ish, 42-ish, about 10 years after George Beecham's guitar was introduced, Les came up with an idea of how to electrify a guitar using magnets like Beecham had and putting them underneath. He created a guitar out of a 4x4 piece of wood, which was essentially a railroad tie. And he attached a guitar neck to it, put the pickups on it, and turned it into a guitar. And he called this the Law. And it played. It could be electrified. It was, a real neck from a real guitar onto a 4x4, and it could be amplified. Now, he went to Gibson Guitar, which at the time was the biggest manufacturer of guitars in America, in the mid-40s, and said, hey, I've got this Law. It's a great idea, great thing. It can be electrified. Anybody can play it anytime, anywhere. And Gibson, which has a long, long history of missing the boat when new ideas come along, said, no, this electric guitar fad that Leo Fender's jumped on and George Beecham is jumped on and Leo Fender, we don't think this is going to work out. Too much of an investment. We're not that interested. And besides, that's the ugliest guitar we've ever seen, and we don't think anybody would ever buy it.
Yeah.
So Les heard that enough times that he eventually went and he cut a hollow body jazz guitar in half and put both sides on either side of the log to make it look more like a real guitar.
That's awesome.
And so he played this in some of his gigs, not always, but it was his version of the electric guitar, but it was never mass produced. And so he kind of put it away, he played again for his gigs, but there wasn't a lot of interest, in part because it was so ugly and because he was the only one with one.
Yeah.
Now, in 1951, so, not almost 10 years, roughly a decade um, after he'd gone to Gibson the first time, and now 2 years after the Leo Fender's Telecaster's been introduced, Gibson goes, wow, maybe this electric guitar thing has some legs. Maybe people are interested. We should probably get into this. It looks like kids are buying guitars. So they came up with their own design for a guitar. They created a guitar, and it actually is the shape you see here in the ad for less, and said, we're going to go into the market with this, but we need a sponsor. We need an endorser, rather. And somebody said, well, hey, Les came a few years ago with this idea for guitar. And he's really popular now. He has his own TV show. He's got a radio show. Maybe he'd like to endorse it. So they brought him in and said, okay, we know we missed the boat in the 40s. We're jumping on now. We'd like to name this after you. We'll put your name on it. And Les was quite enamored of it, and he liked the way it looked. He apparently did not have much input into the guitar other than to say he wanted the first generation of them to be painted with a satin gold finish, so they didn't look like cheap wood like the Fender Telecaster did. Like, no, this is a luxury item. I'm upscale. Leo's stuff is down market. Let's make it look luxurious, paint it a beautiful gold, which is what happened. So you had these two guitars by the mid 50s, or early 50s rather. The Les Paul on the left, beautiful in gold, introduced in 1951 there. And you have the Telecaster, introduced in 1949. You can see the difference in the approach. One is elegant, one is very kind of working man's tool.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
These two shapes kind of came to define, modern guitar, the appearance and image of modern guitar, with one exception. And with that one exception, we're going to do, you get to be the audience participation in this one. What is that? You know what that is?
Coke bottle.
Right. It's said that 100%, apparently 100% of the world's population can identify that silhouette as a Coke bottle. Apparently the most recognizable man-made object in the world. Now, if I show you this, in general, what is that?
It's an electric guitar.
Apparently, and again, this is anecdotally, after the Coke bottle, the second most recognizable silhouette of a man-made object is the electric guitar. Wow. You might not know who made it. You might not know what it's called in terms of the brand or the model or the make, but you know it's an electric guitar. So apparently, following the Coke bottle, the electric guitar is the most recognizable man-made object in silhouette. And that's because of this guitar. This is the Fender Stratocaster. This is the defining look of the guitar since it was introduced in 1954. Also introduced by Fender. Leo had complaints about that first generation Telecaster. It was a little too bland looking. It was a flat slab of wood. It hurt people's ribs when they played it closed. And it looked kind of down market, just as Les Paul had said it would. So in 1954, he went to a draftsman named Freddie Tavares. And Freddie Tavares was doing a lot of his technical drawings in the back. Now, Freddie Tavares is not well known for his drawings. What Freddie Tavares is known for is that at the beginning of every Looney Tunes cartoon, you've got a sound that goes, Freddie Tavares played that on his guitar. So you're hearing, every time you hear Looney Tunes, you're hearing Freddie Tavares.
That's great.
He was a session musician, and after his session career was over, he was hired by Leo to become a draftsman. And basically what he did was he came up with the curves that define the Stratocaster. Freddie's known for Looney Tunes. He really should be known for creating the most iconic.
Yes, he definitely should.
In the world.
Yeah.
And
oh, that's cool.
And something else that made the Stratocaster iconic, or has made it iconic today, is, you know, this one is bright red. It's not wood grain. Every guitar we have seen for the past 2 weeks, now into our third week, with some variation of wood grain.
Yeah.
So it was either stained or high gloss finish, but it was always some beautiful version of wood. Typically meant it was either blondish colored, brownish colored, or tobacco colored.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time, guitars were painted. And not only were they painted in a solid color, they were painted the colors of youth culture, in particular, California car culture. Now, as I said, Leo's company was in Southern California, which was where surf culture began. And as guitarists came to him and said, we want to play your guitar, they were also like, hey, you know, we're carrying this thing around in our cars. Cars are cool. We got woodies, we have surfboards. Guitars have to be cool too. So Leo, again, in his infinite wisdom,
That's awesome.
bought remnant paint from typically DuPont and some other manufacturers of leftover car color paint that was not used by Detroit that year.
Mm-hmm.
So he bought the candy apple red that was found on Mustangs. He found the Fiesta red that was on Thunderbirds, the Lake Placid blue that was on Thunderbirds and Cadillacs. And he started painting his guitars those colors. And the youth of, 1950s kids went wild over it. Wow, it can match my car. It's going to look great on stage.
Yeah.
It doesn't look old and fogey. And that really suddenly made the guitar the instrument of the generation. This wasn't your father's or your grandfather's instrument. This was the instrument that you could call your own and make your own kind of music with. So again, another sign of Leo's brilliance, and his company's brilliance. Let's paint in the colors of the cars that the kids are driving. And so even today, if you want to refinish a Fender guitar, you've got to go find an old car catalog book to match the DuPont paint, or an old DuPont catalog.
Yeah.
Find out, okay, what year were they painting Dakota Reds on Chevys or wherever it might happen to be. And they still come in these colors today. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of people would be shocked if they didn't have a choice of colors, which again is only something available in the last 50 years. So here we are, over the last now 60 years. We've got the three definitive shapes of the guitar. We've got the Telecaster on the left, introduced by Leo Fender. We've got the Gibson Les Paul in the middle, introduced by Gibson, eventually with Les's blessing. We've got the Fender Stratocaster in 1954, which to this day really defines the way the electric guitar looks. But since those days, we've gotten hundreds, literally hundreds of other designs. And you're gonna see these designs and these guitars in the exhibit. And each of them has their own story to tell because each of them suited a particular need in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
You had country players who wanted this kind of look. You had blues players who wanted that kind of look. So it was very a great explosive time to be an inventor and to be a luthier and create all these kind of great things for the guitar. The fact remains, though, that those three that I just showed you are still the three iconic shapes in America. And they have not changed, well, not only in America, throughout the world. They have not changed since their introduction in beginning 1949 and through the 50s, and when they were refined briefly in the 60s. All of those guitars have not changed an iota. So let's think about things from the 1950s and 1960s that have changed. So let's start with the telephone.
Oh my. Yeah.
Here's a telephone. This telephone was used into the 1980s. On the right, you have an iPhone. Yeah. It's a fraction of the size. It does 10,000 things more than the telephone does. The telephone today is not recognizable as the telephone of yesterday. Same is true of computers. In the 1950s and 1960s, computers took up entire rooms, in some cases almost warehouses, full of space in order to do something as simple as the weather forecast. Or do accounting calculations. Today, you can do that not only on your phone, but you've got a laptop that, I remember when Steve Jobs introduced the first iMac, saying that there's more power on this laptop than NASA had when they put a man on the moon in 1960 in one computer. So that's how things have changed from the 50s and the 60s today. Another radical change where one is not even remotely similar to the other. And that extends even to cars. Here's a Cadillac with the, probably, it looks like it's 100 feet long. It's got these big fins on the back, and it's got this big grill with metal all over it, and a big stare in your face kind of windshield. And then you've got a modern Cadillac, which is sleek, and I'm not going to quite go Batmobile standards, but back then it would have been considered insanely futuristic. Again, very little similarity, functions the same, but the design is completely different, which brings us to today. Here's a Stratocaster from 1954. Here's one from 2020. There's no difference. They are exactly the same. The electronics have been improved a little bit. You've got better coil or better magnets. You've got better wiring. But the shape, the design, and the intent are exactly the same as they were half a century ago. So in the years since we have...
Harvey, can I interrupt for just 1 second here? Sorry. Could you go back to those Strats? So for some of those that don't know much about the pickups there, like a regular Stratocaster has 3 pickups. Can you talk about like why 3? What's happening there? Just very basically.
Yeah, I'll start by showing you on here. I should have gotten but there are 2 here. This is the Gretsch Electromatic. It has 2 pickups. One pickup is down near the base of the guitar, and that's used to pick up the treble tones from the guitar's vibration. So the tones that you get closer to the bridge are higher pitch. Same note, but a higher pitch. When you go further up and hold, and you've got a pickup up here closer to the neck, it's picking up more of the bass tones. So the idea with 2 pickups is that you can switch back and forth and get a bassier sound right away from your guitar, or a more treble sound from your guitar, simply by switching which pickup is picking up the vibrations and tone from each one. The beauty of the Stratocaster was that Leo added a 3rd pickup in the middle, which allowed you to take half from each one. So you could get the mid-range. You could do just the bass one. You could do just the treble one. You could do the middle one, just pick up the middle, or you could do the middle one so that it had a little more bass or maybe a little more treble. So it had a 5 selector switch. It gave you this control over all the different variations of tone that were possible from the guitar, not counting what it sounded like going through an amplifier or with any kind of sound effects added to it, but just by picking up the different variations of the strings themselves, you could get this great variation of tone. And that's the reason for all the different pickups.
Very cool. Thanks.
My pleasure. So the point is that, all of this has gotten to, and here's an image that we show in the exhibit, millions, literally millions of people play the guitar. As I said, I think in the very first presentation, in America alone, 3 million guitars are sold every year. Just in America, 3 million guitars. That's more instruments than all other instruments combined. You take every piano, you take every saxophone, you take every violin, and every cello, every drum set, add them together, they don't add up to 3 million guitars. So when you think of the number of guitars that are out there, you think of the number of people who play them, and the number of people who've really risen to the height of pop culture by playing them. Everybody from Jimi Hendrix to Eric Clapton to B.B. King to Jimmy Page to Jeff Beck, whose birthday is today. Happy birthday, Jeff. They've all done it based on this one instrument. It has 6 strings, has the same frets that everybody else has, and yet they've all been able to do something truly amazing with it, and they've been able to call it their own. And that's one of the things that when you come to the museum in September, you'll see that it's not about each musician playing the guitar, it's what all these musicians could do with one guitar. The Stratocaster was the choice of Buddy Guy, of Jimi Hendrix, of Eric Clapton. The Les Paul is the choice of Jimmy Page and Slash. Yet they all have different sounds that they get out of the guitar, even though it's the same guitar. And so it's a great level of opportunity, the potential that guitars offer that we really are celebrating with this exhibit.
It's really great. And the more you know about a player and start to learn about different players throughout history, I found that most players are almost just as interested in their tone, in their sound, how they can become unique in that way, as they are what the notes that they are playing.
Yeah, it's we have photographs and videos in the exhibit, and part of the purpose of the photographs in particular is why do they play that guitar? And some guitarists play it for image. I mean, for some, you know, the guitar looks really cool slung very low. For others, it looks really cool held close to their chest and then wrapped around it. So guitars are part of an image. In addition to just being an instrument that might produce music in the hands of somebody capable, they also become a visual representation of the artists themselves. Yeah. And you think of somebody like Bonnie Raitt, who's always got her Stratocaster, or got Joan Jett, who's got her Les Paul Jr. You look at them and go, oh, I can't imagine them with a different guitar. Eddie Van Halen's, you know, he made his own guitars out of pieces. Yeah. If you think of Eddie Van Halen, you think of all these stripes, and like, well, if anybody else played that, it wouldn't be right. So guitars are also a reflection of personality, not only looking for the tone and the feel, but does it represent the way I want to look to the people I'm playing for?
Very cool.
So there we have your thumbnail introduction to the world of guitar as it prepares to come to the Peoria Riverfront Museum.
It's so great. Well, let me, I'm going to look here and see if we have any questions.
Okay.
I know I have one or two for you. We have several here I'm going through. Give me 1 second here. Okay, so this is a great question because I think probably a lot of our viewers and hopefully some of the people that come to the exhibit have an interest in maybe learning guitar. Somebody has asked, what's better to start out on if you are learning? Should you start out on an acoustic or an electric?
That's a really good question. I don't know if this is going to fit in well with the teachers of the world. It's easier to learn on an electric. An electric guitar uses thinner strings, and the neck is thinner. So especially if you're new, it takes less force on your hands to learn an electric. Now, the cost might be a little more because you need an amplifier to go with it. And depending on who you're living with, they might not like it.
Yeah.
But it's much easier to learn on an electric because because of the way the notes are amplified, you tend to have a certain level of distortion, even when they're clean. And it covers up a lot of your mistakes when you're learning. In an acoustic guitar, there's no place to hide. It's a very, almost like a violin. It can be very unforgiving in that strings are bigger. You've got a bigger instrument to hold on to. You've got to press much harder. Your fingers will hurt and they will callous and they will blister.
Yeah.
And a person who I think said it best is that Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones always says, you know, I only play rock and roll with my electric guitar, but when I'm practicing, I practice on acoustic because it's like swinging two bats in the batting circle. That's the difference. You're playing a harder instrument now that the results are insanely beautiful without needing an amplifier. But to start learning, I do think that a nice electric guitar with a small amp gets you in easily. You can hear good things right away. And the blister and callus level is not quite as high.
I would totally agree. And it's unbelievable how good of an instrument you can get today. At a very low cost, a little practice amp and a beginning electric guitar that sounds really great.
And you can get them at,
a couple $100.
Yeah, you can get them at Costco and they're good. And
yeah,
my daughters started playing instruments. I couldn't convince them to play guitars. My oldest daughter chose flute. And I saw the cost of a flute. Like,
Yeah.
you want $400 for what? I bought 2 guitars for less than that.
That's funny.
My second daughter wanted a violin. I was even more shocked. So the guitar is, it's one of those things that makes it a great instrument. It's not too expensive. It's easy to get into, and
maintenance is pretty low too.
Yeah.
I mean, I see a lot of woodwind instruments come through the music store, and besides changing strings, you can kind of throw electric guitar around and not do too much harm.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're not going to feel, if you do give it up, which you shouldn't, it's not like your parents spent many hundreds or $1,000.
Yeah.
So that's my take on learning guitar.
Cool. Well, I have one more question for you, this is something that that I would like to say as well. But can you remember the first time you heard an electric guitar and were just like, wow, like I just can't believe I'm hearing this? Like what got you so interested in guitar?
I first got interested in guitar in grade school. And in my grade school back in Boston, every kid had to play something. You played the flutophone, or you played the melodica, or you played the guitar. Some kids played trumpet. And I didn't want to play flutophone or melodica or trumpet. So I tried to learn on the acoustic guitar. And it was a really awful acoustic guitar. I mean, my mom and dad and we didn't know good from bad. And
Yeah.
Things were about that far off the fretboard, and my little hands couldn't do it. But I started listening to music and hoping that, I could learn something beyond these cowboy chords, the D, C, G. And I have to say that there were lots of bands that I really liked and listened to, but the first guitar sound that I ever heard that changed everything completely for me was the opening to The Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. That's the one everybody knows, with the Viking.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun.
That's it. You hear that. Dun, 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 dun. And I looked at my acoustic guitar and go, wait, that can't be coming out of this.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able, I heard that coming through a radio in my house. It was like, this sound, I have to be able to make this sound. I didn't care, it wasn't, for a lot of people, it's about can I meet girls? Can I meet members of the opposite sex? Can I, have cool things that I own? I needed to make that sound. And
that's awesome.
to this day, my ringtone is that song. I mean, you hear those, like you just did the dum, 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 dum.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that makes the electric guitar so different from everything else, is that every other instrument ever made relies on acoustics, moving air.
Yeah.
The electric guitar is an electronically produced sound that had never been heard before on planet Earth until somebody plugged it in. And when Jimmy Page plugged that in and made that sound, I was sold, and I've been sold ever since.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's all I've got for you, HP, tonight.
Great.
I can't tell you how much we appreciate the last 3 weeks. I mean, I played guitar a long time, and I know I've been talking with a lot of local musicians in Peoria, and we've learned a lot.
Oh, good.
It's been great.
Well,
and,
thank you. And you'll learn, again, this is skimming the surface. The exhibit has much more in detail and many more things to look at, plus the eye candy that goes along with it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and we will see the exhibit here in September. I look forward to it.
I look forward to hopefully being there with you.
No, it'll be great.
All right. Well, thanks again for having me. You guys be safe, be sane, and have a good summer.
You too.
All right.
Thanks, HP.
Bye-bye.
Bye.